When most people talk about sending people beyond Earth, they have one of two destinations in mind. The first is the moon, which is lovely and all, but really a very boring place. The other is Mars, which is just about close enough for a crew to reach, rocky enough for them to land on, and with a great deal of effort might be habitable enough for them to survive on. This video will argue for a third option, Venus. I can almost hear you laughing. If Mars is barely habitable, then Venus is, well, a hellhole. Temperatures on the surface routinely soar into the hundreds of degrees. Clouds of sulfuric acid swirl through its atmosphere, and intense pressures crush anything that dares land there. When a Soviet probe visited in 1982, it only lasted for about 2 hours before it perished in the brutal conditions. And that's the record. Nothing we have built has endured the hell of Venus for longer. Yet there are reasons to seriously think about Venus as a destination for astronauts. One, put simply, is that it is closer and easier to reach than any other planet. If we want to test our endurance skills and our ability to fly beyond Earth for any extended period of time, then Venus offers a good proving ground. Alongside that, however, there is a portion of Venus that is surprisingly Earth-like. Instead of targeting its surface, we could send astronauts or other probes to the planet's upper atmosphere. Here, about 50 kilometers above the surface, temperatures are much more reasonable. The air pressure resembles that of Earth's surface, as does gravity. And importantly, Venus's atmosphere still provides high protection against the sun's radiation. Put together, this makes the Venusian upper atmosphere one of the most Earth-like places known beyond, well, Earth itself. And theoretically, some have mused, humans could pay a visit. An airship placed there, for example, would gently traverse the skies of Venus, offering a chance to live and study around another world. A decade ago, a NASA study fleshed out this airship concept in detail. It proposed sending a robotic airship to Venus inside a spacecraft. After arriving at a target point some 50 kilometers over the planet's surface, the airship would be released and inflated. At this altitude, winds would blow the airship eastward at about 100 meters per second. That would allow it to circle the planet once every 100 hours or so. But since Venus also rotates slowly, it means the airship would spend about 45 hours at a time in sunlight, thus giving it plenty of time to charge its batteries in preparation for the long night. Such a mission would offer a lot of advantages over the traditional orbiting satellite. An airship would float right inside Venus's atmosphere so that it could conduct long studies of any chemical processes occurring. That may help settle the lingering question of life on Venus. If we're going to find any, it can only be clinging on in the upper atmosphere. But it might also unlock the secrets of Venus's past. The composition of its atmosphere can tell us what is coming out of its volcanoes, and therefore what is happening under its surface. That should reveal what happened to any oceans Venus once had, and whether any water is still buried under its baking hot surface. After the robotic airship has proved the concept, the study then proposes sending people. As before, an airship would be sent inside a spacecraft, but alongside it would come a human crew. After the airship descended and inflated, the crew compartment would be suspended underneath, offering a temporary home for the first visitors to an alien world. Crews could stay inside for a month, the researchers proposed, during which they could carry out experiments on Venus. Or they could stay for much more, although things would get harder the longer they stayed. Crews need food, for example, and Venus, no matter how Earth-like its upper atmosphere might be, is not a great place for growing vegetables. Still, even a stay of a month would have its benefits. A mission of that length should return some useful science, but more importantly, it would be an exercise in having people live and work around another world. That is more challenging than it might sound. So far, our greatest experiment in long-duration human spaceflight has been the International Space Station. Crews routinely spend 6 months at a time on board, living and working in an entirely artificial environment. Future missions, whether to the moon, to Mars, or to Venus, will learn from what we have done there. But the space station is also relatively easy, as long-duration spaceflight goes. Crews are in almost constant contact with the ground and are at all times only a few hundred kilometers from home. Ground controllers can support them and can operate many of the station's systems remotely. The astronauts, although they appear to be alone, are not really so. They benefit from the constant help and support of hundreds of operators and engineers. But when we venture beyond the moon, that support will begin to disappear. A voyage to Mars will take months, and a round trip, assuming the crew comes back at all, will last at least 2 years. No human has ever spent that long in space in one go, and neither has any been so separated from the support of the rest of humanity. That means, should anything go wrong on the way to Mars, say a toilet breaking down or a leak appearing in the spacecraft's walls, the crew will need to find a fix, and they cannot ask for something to be sent up on a resupply mission, since there will not be any. Neither can they make an emergency evacuation in the event of sudden peril. Out there, the astronauts will be truly alone. In that context, a voyage to Mars is an extraordinarily perilous thing, something more akin to the many ill-fated explorations of Antarctica, rather than the relative security of travel to the space station. If there is an easier option, and Venus might be one, then we should strongly consider taking it, if only to start learning how to work and live far beyond the lifeline of Mother Earth. In the 1960s, as NASA started to consider options for a more extended human exploration of space, they raised the idea of sending astronauts to fly around Venus. They would not attempt to land, nor to leave their capsule or visit its atmosphere. The purpose was only to conduct a longer spaceflight than going to the moon had involved, but shorter than going to Mars demanded. The relative orbits of the planets helps as well. Missions to Mars are only possible when the position of the planet aligns properly with Earth. This only happens once every 26 months, meaning there are few opportunities to visit the red planet. But Venus comes around more often, and so a mission can be sent with more flexibility if we so desire. Under the Apollo-era plan, the astronauts would have ridden into space aboard a Saturn V rocket. They would have launched in November 1973 and then spent 5 months traveling towards Venus, which they would have reached in March 1974. After, they would have continued on, looping around the Sun and returning to Earth in December of the same year. We could, if we wanted, do something similar today. Astronauts could launch on Starship or one of the other heavy rockets recently debuted. They would need a decent-sized capsule for the voyage, but one could be built, and we would have to find ways to support them on their long voyage beyond the moon. But that could be done, and indeed must be, if we are serious about going to Mars. Instead, however, the current plans for human exploration call for more focus on the moon. America still wants to build a space station in orbit around our natural satellite, and foresees sending astronauts to visit roughly once a year. Chinese plans target a base on the surface, which crews may visit sometime after 2035. Yet neither option will give us the experience of long flights beyond Earth we need. Visitors to the moon are still in easy reach of Earth. They will still have the psychological safety of a lifeline to our planet, and they will be in range of ground operator help. That will not help us prepare for the challenges of going further. Mars, the proposed next leap, is a very big challenge. Venus offers an intermediate step, a shorter voyage, no temptation of landing, and the opportunity to learn what we need before we try swimming in the deep end.